Welcome to the Peak Potential Success Show. My name is Fong, and today we have another great guest. I've had the privilege of seeing this individual speak live on stage in front of thousands of entrepreneurs and business CEOs and entrepreneurs speaking on a topic that I don't think a lot of people was expecting, and that was critical thinking and how it impacts every aspect of our lives. And some of the stuff that he shared, the stats, the situation that we're in, and what the upcoming youth and generation has in critical thinking is absolutely shocking. And I couldn't wait to go, hey, I need to know more about critical thinking and more about what he knows because I think it's very, very important in this day and age. He is a speaker that is sought after from a lot of educational institutions, conferences, and corporations, speaking on how critical thinking impacts leadership, teamwork, entrepreneurship, careers, parenting, kids, all that stuff. Basically, every aspect of our lives is impacted by critical thinking and the lack of critical thinking. He is featured in a lot of national and international media. He is the author of the book America's Critical Thinking Crisis and the founding partner of studentsuccess.org and also the Critical Thinking Institute. So please welcome TEDx speaker, world's foremost critical thinking expert, Dr. Steve Pearlman.
Thank you so much for having me on. I really appreciate this opportunity.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. Always a joy speaking with leading experts in their field, and you are one of those people who is the absolute expert in critical thinking. And I guess let's just start off by saying, what exactly is critical thinking? Because I
Yeah,
remember you finished talking about your topic on stage, and I turned over to the person beside me. Is like, what exactly is critical thinking? It sounds very, very important. And then I think they replied to me about, well, that is making decisions. I'm like, don't we make decisions all the time? So is that critical thinking? I'm like, I'm guessing there's a level as to what constitutes as critical and what isn't critical. So share with us that journey towards you becoming a critical thinking expert and what exactly is critical thinking.
sure. Well, I taught in academia, higher education for 30 years, and my emphasis was always on the teaching of critical thinking. Led me to eventually found the first academic department in the world that was exclusively focused on researching what critical thinking is and how do we teach people to do it better. And the statistics, as you said, are terrible. Roughly, depending upon the year, roughly 5 to 8% of American college students, including juniors and seniors, are proficient in critical thinking. Again, that's just 8%, 5 to 8%. So we're facing a real crisis here. And we know that business leaders think that critical thinking is the most important asset, but very few can define it. Because when we try to define critical thinking, we typically get answers like yours. Well, it's decision making. Well, we know people make terrible decisions sometimes. So we know that they didn't really think through those. And the trick then is, how do we infuse decision making with critical thinking? So we can make decisions with or without it. We can solve problems with or without it. We can create inventions with or without it. We can be entrepreneurs with or without critical thinking. But if we have it as an asset, then we can accomplish so much more. So as people try to define it, it often collapses because we get into word salads. Well, it's problem solving. Well, okay, but what does that mean? How do we do it better? Or we might say, well, critical thinking is thinking outside the box. Well, an outside the box idea can be terrible. The fact that an idea is outside the box doesn't mean it's a good idea. It can be ridiculous. As Steve Martin, the comedian, said, he had a solution for the population problem, which is death penalty for parking violations. So it's an outside the box idea, but no one's going to want it, right? So
There's
what
also
critical
there's
thinking
also
really is.
sorry, there's also the thought process that thinking outside of the box is, you can't because it's outside. You're stuck inside your box. That's your reference points, right? What's outside of the box is talking to somebody else.
Maybe I can think outside of your box, right? And you can think outside of my box, but
Mhm.
it's hard for any of us to think outside of our own box. That's for
Exactly.
sure. Yeah. My journey, and I studied critical thinking, dedicated 10 years just to the study of how are we going to teach critical thinking and what is it? And it eventually led me to neurological approaches to teaching critical thinking, which is what sets my teachings apart from everybody else that you're going to find on critical thinking, is that we approach it through brain science. We're not just talking about ways to be a little more logical or something like that, or make a better argument or what have you. We're really looking at the science of how the brain works when it thinks. And the short answer is that the brain has two systems. It's got a fast system that is reactive, that is emotional, that is instinctive. And we need that sometimes. You know, when you're driving your car and something jumps out in front of your car, something happens, you got to make an instant action. And that's what that system is for. And then we've got a second system, a slow system, a critical thinking system that uses the forward part of the brain. Um, the problem is that most people's brains want to default, all of our brains want to default to the fast system. So it doesn't have to do the work of using the slow system. We teach people not only how to recognize when their brains are trying to default into the fast system, but how to get it into the slow system and then use aspects of our brain's instinctive efforts to think and translate those into real intellectual, academic, insightful processes for critical thinking. So we offer actual methods for keeping the brain in a thinking state and optimizing the value of that thinking state as we go through life.
That is absolutely fascinating. But so with regards to that, does it increase the time in which you need to go through certain things, or are you also training it to become a faster skill set that you have?
Yeah, it can be both, right? There are times where we want to work faster through problems, and we train people how to do that. Of course, as they become more practiced in the system, they can do it, very quickly at times. And there are times where we have very limited amount of time to make a decision. You got to do something, right?
Right.
And that's fine. And then there's also times where we want to teach people to extend their thinking process about something and not come to conclusions too quickly. Because once we arrive at a conclusion, and this is not metaphorical, once you arrive at a conclusion, your brain stops thinking about it.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's problematic sometimes because a lot of times we come to conclusions too early.
Right.
And we should extend our thinking process. But again, it's situational. Which do you need? You need to be faster or do you need to extend? Sometimes it's one, sometimes it's the other.
Is there a line between what critical thinking is and also common sense?
There's a huge line between common sense and what critical thinking is. Critical thinking is the opposite of common sense. What common sense is, people think, oh, everyone needs a little more common sense, right? What does that really mean? It means everyone needs to think a little bit more like we do in our culture. We need to think a little bit more pragmatically. That's nice. Sometimes that's good. How do we do that? Sometimes what other people call common sense, we call ridiculous. We disagree that that's common sense. So critical thinking and common sense are at odds. The idea is not to think commonly. The idea is to think uniquely. The idea is to think differently and better than everyone else around you. That's the idea of critical thinking. It's not to be common, it's to be distinctive.
So when it comes to critical thinking, what certain things triggers the need for critical thinking? Because I'm assuming that when you do your tests and find out, okay, like only 5 to 8% of individuals have the ability or are proficient at it, there's a level of questions and whatnot to kind of categorize them in that way. So what is that level in which, okay, this is normal, just common sense or normal decision making, but this is critical thinking. So when do you start turning this on?
So first, I just want to be clear: the 5 to 8% figure is from national studies, it's not my figure. It comes
Right.
from other national research. So don't take my opinion for it, right? But in terms of your other question, when do we start to see people transition into critical thinking? It's a blurry line, right? So people can do a little bit of thinking about something, but not enough, or be capable in certain ways, but not capable in other ways in terms of critical thinking. And so the trick is we want to take everybody and teach them the elite ways that the most advanced critical thinkers can operate in terms of using their brain function. And this is what we teach to executives. It's what we teach to businesses all around the world. We're teaching people how to optimize that decision making. And certainly executives know that if their people can make a 5% better decision every day, think about in 1 year how different your business is, how different your outlook is if 5% course correction happens every single day, right? All of a sudden you're going in a far different and better direction. So the trick is understanding that there are different ways that we have to understand how the brain operates. Let me give you a quick example that is very easy for people to apply. There's a part of the brain that thinks about things when you're not thinking about them. So if you've ever suddenly you were thinking about something for a long time, and then That was it. You got tired of thinking about it. You didn't come to a solution, but you're just exhausted. And you decided, it's enough. I can't think about this anymore, right? And the next day you're taking a shower, and all of a sudden an idea comes to you. The solution hits you, right? That's because the brain has different systems for thinking. And you have to know that the brain can be thinking about things in the background and making connections about things when you're not consciously deliberating about it. But you have to know when to operate that and how to shut it off and how to turn it on. And if we teach people how to do that, then we understand that sometimes when we thought about something for a while, the best thing to do is not think about it at all, and then a solution will come to us. But that's the kind of thing that people have to understand about how their brain works and when to optimize these different processes.
Mm-hmm. Are you able to give us a scenario of, let's say, a case study or a situation in which, okay, one individual is using critical thinking and the other scenario is not using critical thinking? What kind of results would one get?
Yeah, so let me give you an example of what happens when we do this and how powerful it is. We go into a lot of educational institutions, and let's say we're going into a college, and we'll show them a paper, and we've taught them about critical thinking and how to grade it, and we'll grade that paper, and usually it's something like a D or an F in terms of its critical thinking ability, really low, right? And we'll say, okay, this is a first semester freshman in a writing course, and the student achieved something like a D or an F, and this is their paper. And then we show them another paper, and we say, well, where would you rate this paper in terms of the student's critical thinking? And they usually are somewhere around an A. And then they'll say, okay, well, I'll ask them, what student produced this? Was this a senior? Was it a graduate student? Was it a junior? Who produced this paper? And typically they say, well, something like a junior or a graduate student wrote this paper. And then we tell them this. That's the same student who wrote the first paper 2.5 months later. Okay, so in 2.5 months, we're taking students who otherwise are writing with virtually no critical thinking in their work, and we're turning them into graduate level writers and thinkers. That's how powerful this system is. Imagine being able to write like a grad student after 2 months in college. Okay, that's how powerful this system is. And that's what we bring to people. We bring to corporations as well. It's a different context, but it's kind of the same result. So that gives you an idea of the pre and post that's not assessed by us, but assessed by other people, other educators, and so forth.
Are there some things that you could share about with regards to the techniques? Like, what are some of the exercises or some of the things that people work on in order to increase that critical thinking? Like, within that 2-month period, what changed in their lives in order for them to do so?
Let me give you one of our first rules. We have a few rules for critical thinking. And one of the first rules that we tell everybody is to fight the urge to be right. Okay. So all of our brains want to be right, and they want to be right as fast as possible. Why do they want to be right as fast as possible? Because it's survival. Our brains view rightness as safety, right? Because we're alive right now, you and I. And the reason we're alive right now is obviously that our brains have made the right decisions and think the right things in order to have kept us alive to this point. We didn't jump off a bridge and we didn't, do something else. We're alive. So that's great. Okay, unfortunately, the brain therefore views uncertainty as a threat. If we don't know the answer to something, that not answer that we don't know could be something that could kill us, right? This is subconscious, but it's baked into all of our brains. So the brain wants to be right as quickly as it can possibly be right, so it can rest, it can feel comfortable and safe again. And that's why you'll see so many people who are so obsessed with being right about things. All right, so we tell people you got to fight the urge to be right. So it slows your brain down and tells your brain that being uncomfortable and uncertain is actually safer for us in a lot of ways because it allows us to think through things and come to a better conclusion. And this conclusion that's better is going to advance our life goals rather than getting in the way of them. So let me give you an example of the science behind that. They've done studies and they've watched brain activity when they presented people with a question. And the question had with a problem. And the problem had a simple answer that was wrong or a complex answer that was right. And they asked people what the answer was. Most people's brains opted for the simple answer, even though it was wrong. Why? Because the brain wants to feel right. Doesn't mean it is right. The brain wants to feel right regardless, and it wants to feel right fast. So they opted for the wrong answer that was simple. Okay, the fast answer. Now that everyone who runs a business should take note of that, right? Most of your employees, if you present them with a simple answer that's wrong or a complex answer that's right, they're going for the simple wrong answer. That's their brain's natural instinct. It's not their fault. But here's what's more interesting about it. What the most interesting part about it is that when they went for the wrong answer that was simple, their brains hesitated for a second. There was a hiccup. Okay, it was a fraction of a second, but that's significant thinking time. There was a hiccup, meaning that their brains knew they were doing something wrong. Their brains knew that they should think through this problem more and come to a different answer, and they didn't. That hesitation is very telling for us because normally brains wouldn't hesitate in making the decision. They only did it because they knew the answer was wrong and they should think about it more, and they didn't. So our brains really sometimes are working against us. But if we learn how to harness that power, then our brains can serve us better in terms of all of our life goals, all of our entrepreneurship, all of the businesses that we're running, and all of our employees, and so on and so forth.
That's absolutely fascinating, especially if people already know it's wrong and they have that inkling, but still pick it anyways.
Right.
And I also find it funny that it's not their fault. That's just how their brains are work. I'm like, I wonder if I could use that for the next mistake I make. It's like it's not my fault. That's how my brain's wired.
Right. We'd all love to be able to do that, right?
Exactly. Now, you did mention that there's going to be a wave of entrepreneurs, a wave of the next generation of professionals and whatnot, but they have a proficiency of like the 5%, right? You also wrote the book, The Crisis of Critical Thinking. So, what are we kind of anticipating if things don't change?
Well, I think the answer is pretty clear already, right? Let's look at how the world is moving. Let's look at the general people around us and so forth. Is there anyone who's looking at the world right now and thinking, gee, there's too much critical thinking going on? I don't think anyone's coming to that conclusion. I think what we're all seeing is a decay and a necessity for more critical thinking rather than less. And unfortunately, artificial intelligence is getting in the way. As much as AI can be used for some very positive things, I'm not against all uses of AI. There's some very positive aspects to what it can do for us. But in terms of critical thinking skills, we know from many of the early studies that are coming out that it's killing people's ability to think critically. So if you have a lot of employees and they're using a lot of ChatGPT and other AIs, okay, then just realize that they might be producing a faster answer to something or a faster email, but they're producing the same faster email that everyone else is going to produce using the same AI or similar. They're producing the same report that everyone else is going to produce. They're not thinking critically. But I'll tell you something that's even more terrifying about AI. Okay. So they did some study of college students, and one group of students was able to use AI to write their papers, and another group of students was not allowed to use AI to write their papers. There are a lot of outcomes from that, mostly that favored the group that did not use AI. But the group that used AI, and this is the really scary part, actually showed lower brain activity, not just while they were in the writing process, but for long periods after the writing process of their papers, they still showed diminished brain activity because they had relied instead on ChatGPT as a crutch. Right? So any muscle that we don't use in our body atrophies and it grows weak. The same thing is really literally true with the mind. And the brain is a series of wires and circuits that it builds. So every thought you have has been built there's wiring for that in your brain. Mm-hmm. But if you don't use that wiring, your brain overwrites it very quickly and uses it for something else instead. So we can either wire people's brains to think critically, or you can wire people's brains to rely on AIs to not think as much. Which do you want for yourself? Which do you want for your kids? Which do you want for your employees? Because really, all of our fates depend on those kinds of decisions, and they're very high stakes right now. So that's why I think more than ever, what we are seeing is that people are realizing, especially business leaders, that AI is a threat to critical thinking in their employees that can do other things. There are great things that it can do for us, and it should. But it's in one respect, this respect, it's a terrible threat, and employers are recognizing it very quickly. And that's why the need for critical thinking is becoming more palpable now that AI has hit rather than before it. We're actually getting much more solicitation for seminars and workshops and so forth than we did prior to AI, because people are realizing, oh my God, I can't let my ability to think, I can't let my kids' ability to think, I can't let my employees' ability to think atrophy and die because we're able to generate a report with AI. It's not helping us overall.
Hmm. It seems like your industry right now is probably the industry that people should put money into because it's only going to go up. I mean, it feels like critical thinking goes down as technology goes up. It feels like because of social media, because of the introduction of like the phones and computers and all that kind of stuff, start to reduce the ability to think critically. So it doesn't feel like technology is something that we could stop. So what is the counteractive actions that people can take to build up that critical thinking, but still implement technology, AI, and the speed of things that needs to be done?
Yeah, that's a perfect question, really, and I'm glad you asked it. It's well thought out because we do see exactly that. What we see is that the rise of technology decreases critical thinking, generally speaking. That started with radio. It was not too significant with radio, but it became much more significant with TV. And then, many years later, suddenly we have the internet and social media, and now we have AI. And each one has a progressively negative effect on critical thinking
Mhm.
skills. For parents, my advice is keep your kids off any electronic devices as much as possible for as long as possible. Okay, so if they once in a while they're playing a game on an iPad or doing something like that, is anything negative going to happen to their brain on a limited basis? Absolutely not. If that's what they're doing most of the day, then certainly you're degrading their capacity to build critical thinking skills and important brain function. But for everybody else, the idea is really to use what we have, which is instruction in critical thinking, and to develop those critical thinking skills that we all have them, and we all have the capacity for them, but to develop them in a conscious, dedicated, scientifically proven way. If you don't want to do that, which is optimal, then a second opportunity would be simply try to do a lot more reading and writing and conversation without any technology in between. Those are all brain positive
Mm.
activities. They don't necessarily teach you to think critically per se. That's a very specific thing that we have to teach people how to do. But they are positive for building brain function and neural pathways and so on and so forth. And you're right. We're building out right now, and a lot of people want to invest, and we're looking for investors to build out some major projects right now with respect to critical thinking for kids in the world and businesses and so on and so forth. But yeah, it's a very good question because technology is a threat. It has advantages as well. I don't want to get rid of a lot of medical technologies that we've developed over the years. They're great. We want them. And there are lots of things that we can do with media that's wonderful, like the conversation that we're having now.
Mhm.
This is an exceptional use of social media. It's great, right? But that's not necessarily all of the uses.
Mm.
So let's be judicious in our personal lives in terms of how we use technology and why.
Mm. So how would you implement AI into critical thinking yourself? And how do you instruct your clients to do so?
So the AI is really um, a side note to critical thinking
Mm.
because we're going to do the same thing that we do with AI with anything else. So what we can do with AI is we can ask it to generate an output to a question or a problem, but then we have to think critically about that output. So we're still having to learn how to think critically.
Mm.
And we can go back and we can interact with the AI and ask it to reiterate a number of different solutions or tell it that we don't like this part of the solution, what else would it recommend? But at some point, again, we have to be the determiner of whether or not that output from the AI is in fact doing something positive. Is it moving us in the right direction? Is it getting to a better solution? Or is it getting to a worse solution? Is it picking solutions that other people have done, but that ultimately didn't work out? Or what are the differences? Because it's just scraping the internet for things that have been done before similarly. What are the differences between the situation we're in and the situations from which the AI is pulling its responses. There are always differences, but can we recognize them? Can we think about them? Do we know what they are? So that's a lot of what we're teaching people to do, but it's really no different than interacting in terms of if you have a problem and you have somebody else who has a different opinion about that, figuring out how to work together to solve that problem. It's really no different than if you read a book or a paper or a report or whatever you're reading, and there's something there you have to think about. At some point, we have to be the thinking agent in that interaction. And the skill sets are really the same, regardless of what we're interacting with, whether it's AI or anything else.
Now, when it comes to critical thinking, how much of that is related to taking on challenges or new experiences? Because you mentioned before, there is a whole other side of it, but then there's also a side of it where I believe it's your reference points. Like, what are you experiencing? What can you kind of relate to? But if you don't expand those experiences, then your ability to think critically is also not being built. So is it one thing where you go out there and try more things, say yes to new opportunities, say yes to more challenges, face fears, face challenges, face ups and downs, and then that will eventually lead to the ability to do more critical thinking?
That's a that's an amazing question. It's great. It's right on point, in fact. So the way our brain works, it thinks through frameworks. Some technical terms for that. Let's just think of it as templates. Okay, basically, your brain works through templates. So any problem you encounter, what your brain does is it goes back and searches very quickly and it finds the template that was most like the one that you're facing right now, and it applies that template to this problem, right? So you're facing a new problem and it goes back and it finds template 3012, and template 3012 is the one that it's going to apply to this problem because it faced 3012 was similar. But the new problem probably has some differences. So what are the differences? But that said, the more templates that we have, the more we're able to expand the scope of those templates through new experiences, through different kinds of interactions, through other people's ideas, through seeing the world differently, then the more we have to rely, we adjust that template and change that template to fit the new problem. So new experiences, new thinking experiences, other people's perspectives, all these things are absolutely critical for us in being able to understand how our templates work and improve our templates for problem solving. It's a great question.
It's one of those things I think it's a combination of technology and also the willingness to be engaged and putting yourself out there. Like when you're saying, hey, technology is great, then AI is great for people to use. Well, you have to use it in a way that actually gives you those new experiences, that gives you the ability to meet new people and connect with people. But if you're using it to, kind of dumb your brain and watch TV all the time and watch videos all the time, then that doesn't really help. So it's one of those things where people need to recognize, hey, how do I implement all this stuff to increase new experiences and new opportunities? Now, when it comes to kids, again, like you mentioned, taking kids off of technology, off of like phones and stuff like that, what other things will increase their, like, at what age do you start going, hey, try this problem or try that problem for them to develop better critical thinking skills?
Every age, once they can start to talk.
Hmm.
As soon as kids can, really before that, but in terms of interacting with them from a real reasoning perspective, we can only do that, as well. They can move blocks around, and that's still building their brains. They can't talk yet, but they can play with blocks and move them around, and maybe start to stack them. That's great. But I'm talking once in terms of real critical thinking, as appropriate to the age and the problem, right? But we treat everything with your kids like a problem to be solved with them, not a problem to be solved for them. So I've never told my son the answer to anything in his life. We always talk about, what does he think? Why do you think it might be that? And then I might eventually tell an answer, right? But generally speaking, my son knows that if he asks a question, we're going to think through this thing first. So we treat everything as a problem to be solved. And we think about different ways to solve it and different ways to look at it. And what is their opinion? Even with things that have to do with parenting, how we're parenting them. Everything can be something with which to think critically with your kids. That doesn't mean to negotiate with them. But let me give you an example of what I mean. So kids' bedtime is 8 o'clock. I made this up, right? Typically, they're going to bed at 8 o'clock. That's the time they have to get into bed. And they come and say to you, well, I want to stay up late tonight. And you say, well, why do you want to stay up late tonight? And they say, well, I want to stay up late because, there's this silly show on that I really want to watch. You say, well, do you think that's a good enough reason? Because last time you stayed up late, you were too tired for school and you were cranky in the morning. Do you really feel like that's a reason to stay up late? And they might say, well, I do, or they don't, and we work through it. And eventually we might have to make a decision that they don't like. I'm not saying it's a negotiation, but we've started to think through it and we've explained why we're making the decision that we're making, even if they disagree. But on the other hand, they might say to us, well, I want to stay up a little later tonight because it's the State of the Union. And, I think it's very important that I see the State of the Union address, and my parents and my teachers said I should try to watch it. And you might say, well, that's actually a very good reason to stay up late, right? So, okay, stay up late. So now we allow our kids to potentially change our decision as parents by what they're thinking critically about. And we show them that the most important thing isn't our authority, it's our capacity to reason with you. And that's really what we're trying to teach you to do. Our whole job as parents is to become obsolete. That's our goal, is to make our kids fully functional in the world and not have to rely on us. They always will, to a degree. They'll come back and they'll ask us questions. We can talk to them still, of course, as people. But our goal is to become obsolete. So the earlier we start training our kids to be so that we become unnecessary, the better off they are. And that's really a pretty simple answer.
Your example is so much more sophisticated than the one that I thought of, and because when you were talking about have them figure out and start doing problem solving and giving them situations to think through, and just the other day, my daughter's like, "Oh, I want a piece of that." I'm like, "But it's gonna be hot." She goes, "Okay, that's fine. Just give me a piece." I gave her a piece, and she, hot, hot." I'm like, and then all I said was, "Figure it out. Just figure it out." That's my example.
Well, look, I mean, everything can be a thought process, right? If this is really hot, do you really think, why do you think it's still a good idea to have it? Right? And so I really want it right now. And you say, okay, well, do you feel like your urges, just because you want it is more important than the fact that you might get burned by it? And
Exactly.
so now we're just talking it through. And eventually they might say, and there are times where I did it with my son as well. And they say, well, yeah, I still really want it. And you go, okay, if it's not something that's really going to hurt them, and obviously, right, keep them safe. But if
Mm.
it's something where they might get a little bit of a repercussion from their decision, then you say, okay, go ahead, right? Because part of learning to make better decisions is that learning through making bad decisions.
Exactly.
And that's true for all of us, and it's never going to change. We're all going to make bad decisions and
Well,
learn
I
from
also gotta say that I think I trained her in running faster too, because I've never seen a 5-year-old run to get a plate so fast.
them. Yeah, she'd do well in our house then as well.
Exactly. So I know you have your book out. How long has that book been out, and how do people get it?
America's Critical Thinking Crisis is out. It's out on Amazon, but the book everyone's really going to want is the one that'll be out in about a month from the taping of this, which is my new book. It's going to be Apex Critical Thinking.
Mm.
And it'll be a lot of what we teach for people at the Institute with respect to critical thinking. So if they don't want to come get our courses, which of course we recommend, they can get the book. And that's a good starter for understanding what critical thinking is and how to get your brain to do it and how to teach your kids to do it.
Awesome. Do you also have like a set of like survey questions, questionnaire, or a test of some sort that people could do at home? They go, okay, here's my level of critical thinking.
No, critical thinking is very hard to assess in short order.
Mm.
It's one of the challenges with it because the most of the assessments that we have for critical thinking, not all of them, are things like multiple choice questions or short answer questions, which can only assess very limited aspects of critical thinking, and still people do poorly on them. Half of Americans recently failed a very simple critical thinking test, and the vast majority of the rest got D's and C's. So only a very small percentage, it was 3%, got an A.
Oh man.
Um, okay, so but those are even the simpler tests. Real complex critical thinking, we have ways to assess it at the institute, but it's not something that we can teach people to do very quickly.
Are there tests online that you would recommend or not really?
I look at it differently. The way I look at it is like this. We haven't encountered nearly anyone who has developed dedicated critical thinking skills without instruction.
Hmm.
Now, when I say that, I want to make something very clear. Everyone thinks all the time. We're always thinking when we're making our decisions. Some people are obviously have more higher intelligence than others, and that comes into play as well. So we're able to think through things in life a lot of times, regardless of, and make positive decisions, effective decisions, whether or not we've been trained in critical thinking. But, but without serious training in critical thinking, we're at much greater peril of also making bad decisions in our lives, right? So, for example, it's a very interesting thing that we have some studies that show that intelligent people are better at rationalizing bad ideas, their wrong ideas, than less intelligent people. Why? Because if you get an idea in your head and you're a very smart, intelligent person, and someone challenges that idea, you have better ways to create ideas and evidence or backing for arguments for why your idea is right than other people do. But that's not really helping you, because now all you're doing is finding out more intelligent ways to justify a bad idea. So that doesn't mean that we don't want intelligent people in the world. We certainly do. But we have to train that intelligence as to how to recognize when it's advocating for a bad idea and shift it to a good idea, to think through things better so it doesn't come to those bad ideas, and so on. And that's really why critical thinking is not something that you want to say, well, what level is my skill? It doesn't really matter. Your skill could be a lot better than it is if you get dedicated training in critical thinking, because it's really very easy to learn, but no one's teaching it. And that's the differential, right? So even if your critical thinking is great, it's typically happening on a more instinctive level. Could you really define what your brain's doing? Do you know what the science of what your brain's doing when it's thinking? What if you did? What if you could harness that power as being an already good critical thinker? Imagine how far you could go up the ladder compared to someone who starts off as a poor critical thinker. Because there's no limit to how well we want to be able to think critically. There's no top of that point, right? You know, however well you're thinking right now, and obviously you're a smart guy, and I'm sure you think through things well, but however well you're doing that, wouldn't you want to be able to do it better? Right?
Definitely.
As I always say to people, critical thinking is the most important thing there is. And if you don't think that, then I'd ask you to think about the fact that you had just had to think that it isn't. Right? So you're thinking one way or the other. You're trapped in it.
That is awesome. That reminds me of a scenario. I was talking to an engineer about a real estate deal that they really want to do. And I told him it's not going to work. You're going to lose money within X amount of months. And then 2 hours later, he came back to me. He had 13 pages of hand calculations and goes, but look, this works and this works. I'm like, no, you're justifying it. It's not going to work. Just don't do it.
Right.
So it's,
Yeah.
but then it also seems like in order for a person to realize that they're not using critical thinking is that somebody else has to come in with something that counters it.
Or at least we run into consequences.
Oh, right.
Sure. But yeah, a lot of times, one of the ways that we want to understand how well we're thinking through something is by the ideas that other people are presenting. And sometimes those ideas are better than ours and more successful. Sometimes we find an idea between us that's better than either one of us had, or right, the group does it, and so on. But at the same time, one of the things that we tell corporations as we do trainings is that groupthink is a real danger to critical thinking. So let me give you a very fast example of what happens. And this is not my opinion. There are plenty of research studies on this. You have people sitting around in a group, and you say, okay, your group's got to make a decision. And we're going to assume at this point, no one in the group is a leader. They're all on the equal scale, okay? Because if there's a leader there, it's also another problem. So everyone's there is equal in terms of their standing in the corporation. First person puts out an idea and says, I think we're brainstorming. I think we got to do this. Next person puts out, and I'm shortcutting a lot of this, right? But just for example, second person says, well, I think that's a good idea. Third person says, it's an interesting idea. Now you're the fourth person. You have a different idea, or you had one. Are you going to be the one to come up and stand up against the group now and say, wait a second, I don't think that's a good idea? No. Most of the time we know that brainstorming sessions like that are supposed to generate ideas, and they do obviously generate something, but we know that they're actually suppressing a lot of the critical thinking of the individual members of the group. Now, there are ways around that. There are ways to bring out the critical thinking of everyone in the group, but you got to know what they are. And that's an example of where just hearing other people's ideas or being exposed to other ideas doesn't necessarily improve critical thinking. It has to do with the dynamic with which that interaction is occurring. How do we know how to interact with other people's ideas? How do we have the comfort to interact and stand up for our own ideas? Our brains are tribalistic by nature. So once there's a group, and once we feel that there's a tribe been established around an idea, most people are very scared of going against their tribe and saying, I'm not sure that's a good idea, even if it's a terrible idea that might get them killed, right? They're still very scared to step up and say something about it. And that's true for everybody. It's in all of our brains, is this tribalistic mechanism. It's how we survived over the years.
Exactly.
But it's not always constructive. So it's not just being exposed to ideas, it's learning how to interact with them.
Mm-hmm. That is so true, and that could go on for another couple hours of discussion there.
Yeah.
So thank you very much for that. Just very quickly, what exactly are you looking for with regards to your ideal clientele and corporations and whatnot?
We really, in different ways, we have the capacity to work with everybody who is seeking better critical thinking skills. And we can do that we offer online programming for kids and parents.
Mm-hmm.
We offer online programming for adults who just want to improve for themselves in terms of critical thinking. We offer online program that can work for businesses if they just want something online that's evergreen for their employees to see and develop through, and we can show them outcomes from that, of course. Or we offer on-site virtual or on-site training and workshops in critical thinking, which is what we recommend most because those are the most effective. But everything is a great movement towards more critical thinking. And the worst thing you do is simply do nothing about it, right? Because again, whatever critical thinking skills we might have, we want more. And there's no answer to that otherwise.
Right. And what's the best way for people to reach out?
Just go to thectinstitute.com. That's thectinstitute.com. You can reach me at stevejp@thectinstitute.com. You can also go to my Substack, which is called Pearlman Actual Intelligence. And you can also listen to my podcast, which is called Pearlman Actual Intelligence with Steve Pearlman.
Awesome stuff. Just out of curiosity, you got another 5 minutes or you got to go soon?
Absolutely, sure.
All right. So before I let you go, I got some rapid fire questions for you. No critical thinking involved.
Okay.
Give me the first thing that comes to mind. You're stranded on a deserted island, one food to eat for the rest of your life, no consequence. What would that be?
That's a hard one. I guess if we're talking about one food only, I'm not picking a nationality. Like I'm not saying like Italian or Mexican. I'm going to go with sushi.
Great choice. You're in a car ride for hours on end, only one song to listen to over and over again. What song would that be?
Probably would be something Billy Joel. I don't know. I'm going to say Angry Young Man.
Hollywood calls and goes, "Hey, Steve, we love your story, your journey. We would love to do a biopic of you. Who would you cast to play you?"
Obviously, a Brad Pitt would probably be, I think, try to live up to me in terms of the role. Yeah.
Well, Brad Pitt shows up at your door and goes, "Hey, I got cast to play you," and you go, "Hey, buddy, let's go hang out. This is what we're gonna be doing. What's that night look like?"
We're going out for great sushi, great dinner, and then we're going to do some martial arts.
Ooh, very nice.
Yeah.
Give me a number from 1 to 4.
4.
1, 2, 3, 4. Zoom. So we're on the platform Zoom. How would you use Zoom as a metaphor for success?
Success is in part about being able to get exposed to other people's ideas and perspectives and interact with those. So that's how we're using Zoom.
Nicely done. So that's how Zoom is a success. Thank you very much for your time. It was great chatting with you, and I'm pretty sure I could chat with you for a few more hours here because you're such an expert with this area, and it's a very, very fascinating topic. Any final words from you?
Uh, Only this, whatever people are thinking out in the world, one of the most important things that we all need to learn to do, me included, is to revisit our thinking, to reflect on, think about our thinking, right? Don't just make your decisions. Think about the process you use to make them, and be willing to recognize where you could be better, and also that means where you could be wrong. And the capacity to be wrong and recognize our flaws in our thinking and accept those is the best way to think better. But it's also important for one another that we are able to recognize with one another where we could be better in terms of our thinking.
Awesome. Well, thanks. That is great words to live by. So everybody, make sure you reach out to Dr. Steve Pearlman here. If you need to level up your thinking, and I'm pretty sure everybody needs to level up their thinking, get in touch with Steve. And yeah, I think we've broken the record of how many times we use the word thinking. So thank you very much for that. Until next time, he's Dr. Steve Pearlman. I'm Fong. Today is the day to lock your peak potential. We'll see you later.